Hey everyone, on this episode of Mixing with Mercs, we're going to be going over how to read a recipe. Whenever I tell someone that I teach foods and nutrition, a lot of people will say that they can't cook. And it's my opinion that just about anyone can cook. It's just a matter of knowing how to read a recipe and knowing what a lot of the terminology means. If you go back and look at a lot of my cooking terms videos, those videos show you what many of the cooking terms that you'll come across in recipes mean. But a lot of times following a recipe just comes along to reading directions and knowing what those directions mean. So this video is going to show you what to do when you encounter a recipe and what each of the parts of a recipe mean. So follow along as we go. So we're going to start out looking at a very simple recipe for potato salad. So this is going to have all of the parts of the recipe that any other recipe would have in it. And by looking at this recipe and breaking down all of the different parts, we're going to be able to look at any recipe and know exactly how to follow any recipe that you encounter. The first recipe part we're going to be looking at is yield, and this is one of the ones that people have the most trouble with. The definition of yield is that it tells the number and size of the servings that the recipe is going to make. This is really important because it's going to tell how much the recipe is going to give you. For example, if you're looking at something like mac and cheese, it's going to tell you how big the servings are going to be and how many of those servings it's going to make. This is important because sometimes you're using mac and cheese as a entree and sometimes you're using it as a side dish. So knowing how big the servings are going to be is going to help you know exactly how many times you're going to have to make the recipe in order to make the amount that you'd like to have so that you don't have too much or too little. The yield is very important in determining how much of a recipe you're going to need to make. So as you can see from this potato salad recipe, it's going to yield 24 3-ounce servings. So if that serving size seems a little small for you, you might want to make more if you're trying to serve more than 24 people or if you want to have leftovers for more than 24 servings. But if you're trying to just get enough for 12 servings, then that might be plenty. So it just helps you make a determination as to how much of the recipe you need to make. The yield is really important for planning purposes for shopping and for preparation. So this next part is the part of the recipe that probably causes the most issues, and it's not for the reason that you think. It's the list of ingredients and amounts, and this is all of the ingredients listed out. They're listed in either weights or volumes, so all of your ingredients are going to be listed in the order that they are in the recipe. And the reason that this part of the recipe hangs people up is that a lot of people get very, very excited that they are making something, that they are cooking something, and if it's something they have not made before, they forget that this is not the directions. This is the list of ingredients. And so we're going to get to the directions in a little bit, but just keep in mind that this list of ingredients is just telling you what to get together. It's telling you what you need for your recipe and what you're supposed to be gathering. Not that you're just supposed to take all these things and start dumping them in a bowl. When people say they can't cook, this is the reason why. So as you can see from this recipe, the ingredients are highlighted in purple. So when I see students that are cooking in a lab, what will happen a lot of times is that the mistake they'll make is that they'll see this list of ingredients, they'll start measuring things, and they just throw into the pot, throw it into the bowl, and because there's a specific order in which you have to add things in, it's going to mess up if you don't follow the order in the directions. So the ingredients and the directions are separate parts of the recipe. So as I mentioned earlier, the directions are a very important part of the recipe. Without the directions, you're not going to know the order in which you add ingredients. And for some recipes, it's not as important as others, but with others, such as biscuits, the order in which you add your ingredients are going to have a huge effect on what your end product is going to be. So I always recommend that when you're looking at a recipe, read the entire recipe before you begin, because that's going to help you out with making sure that you understand where you're going to be going by the end of the recipe. It also helps you get out of that headspace when you read the ingredients where you get overly excited and just start adding things in without thinking about it. So as you can see, in the directions, these are highlighted in blue, and it's going to tell you in order and usually in a numbered out form exactly what you do step by step in that recipe. So once you've gathered all your ingredients, then you're going to start following the directions with those ingredients. So your next category for your recipe is going to be your container size and type. And it's really important to understand that all of the equipment that you need for your recipe is not going to be listed out. Some of it is going to be implied. For example, things like mixing bowls or spoons or measuring spoons, measuring cups, those types of things. So that kind of thing, it's going to be implied what you need, and you're going to have to figure that out based on the recipe. It might say things like a large mixing bowl, a medium mixing bowl, those types of things, but generally even then it's not going to tell you like the number of quarts that mixing bowl is, and so it's going to be very general. But you might have things that are specific sizes, like certain sizes of baking dishes, 8x8 baking dishes, 9x13 baking dishes, certain sizes of cake pans, certain sizes of muffin pans, certain sizes of pots and pans, so like a certain number of quarts, a certain number of pints, those types of things. So for this recipe, it's going to specify the size pot you need. So you need a 4-quart or larger stock pot to hold that number of potatoes. You also need a large bowl. So it'll tell you those types of things. Like I mentioned earlier, you will see specific sizes of baking pans, baking sheets, and those types of things. So keep that in mind as you are looking at your recipe, and that might be something you need to look at before you even begin or before you choose your recipes, because you might need to make a decision as to what recipe to choose based on what equipment you have readily available. Or you might have to adapt your recipe a little bit based on what type of containers that you have. For example, if you have a recipe that calls for a 9x9 pan and you only have a 9x13, you might need to double your recipe to put in the 9x13 pan. Or if you have a recipe that calls for muffins and you don't have a muffin pan and you want to turn it into something like banana bread, then you would need to change up your recipe a little bit, maybe lower the temperature, increase the time, and those types of things. And I know it sounds strange that for a larger amount that you would lower the temperature, but for a larger amount of volume for any sort of recipe, if you have a larger pan size, you are going to decrease your temperature and increase your time, because the outside will burn before the inside cooks. So generally when you're playing around with pan sizes, you may need to decrease your temperature and increase your time if you are getting into a larger pan size or a larger amount of food. So the next section of the recipe is going to be temperature and time. And some recipes, like baking recipes, are going to have a very specific temperature, like 400 degrees, and then a range of time, like 15 to 18 minutes. And then other recipes, like something that you boil or simmer, like a soup or a stew, is going to have something like bring to a boil and simmer for this amount of time, or it might say something like boil for this amount of time. And so you'll need to keep an eye on those types of things. And then some recipes are going to say things like freeze for this number of hours or chill for this number of hours. It just kind of depends on the recipe. And these types of things are things that you might need to keep an eye on your specific oven, your specific stove, and then if you move, understand that your new oven or your new stove is not going to behave like the other one. So ovens and stoves behave very differently. And so some ovens are hotter, some ovens are colder, and so keep in mind that a lot of times a recipe is going to work a little bit differently in one appliance than another one, and so you might need to adjust things a little bit. If you are finding that things are burning on a regular basis or things are not cooking very well, you might need to have an appliance repair technician come and look at things just to make sure that there isn't something wrong with your appliance, because a lot of times your thermostat on your appliance might be wrong, or you might need to get some things repaired, because I've seen situations where ovens are off by hundreds of degrees, and you want to make sure that things are accurate so that you're not messing up a lot of recipes. And it might cost some money, but in the long run you're going to save yourself money if you're not ruining a whole lot of food. So as you can see from this recipe, the temperature is going to be boil, because boiling is going to be 212 degrees or higher. The amount of time is going to be 15 to 20 minutes. And then you're also going to have another temperature in here of storing in the refrigerator. And this is potato salad, so you want to store it until it gets cool and serve it at refrigerated temperatures as well. But just in general, you're looking for any sort of time and temperature parameters, and that also is going to help you plan out how long it takes to serve things and how long that things need to be prepared in advance. Nutritional analysis is something that's going to be very personal in terms of whether you need it or whether you don't. So it's not needed for the preparation of the recipe, but it can be very, very important if you're planning your menu based on specific dietary needs. And that can be for any number of reasons. Sometimes it's for things like high cholesterol, high blood pressure. Sometimes if you're a diabetic, then you might need to do things like lower sugar or watch the carbohydrates that are in a recipe. So depending on what your medical needs are, nutritional analysis can decide whether or not you're able to eat a recipe or whether you need to make any adaptations or changes to that recipe. And some recipes are going to have very limited information on what the nutritional analysis is, and some of them are very, very specific. And it kind of depends on who's putting the recipe out. So if it's a personal recipe that's made by a individual citizen, generally you're not going to have as much specific information. But a lot of times if it's put out by a company or an organization, they might have a lot more specific dietary information available just because they have access to more resources. But there are websites available that if you put in information into the website as to what ingredients are in there, it will analyze the nutritional information for you so that you can make an informed decision for yourself. So this recipe only has the calories, protein, fat, and carbs, so just your main macronutrients. Some of your recipes are going to have your vitamins and minerals as well, and that's super important information for certain conditions, but this will give you a good idea if you're trying to keep certain nutrients in check. And some of your more detailed recipes that are available from companies and stuff will have more of this information, so it just kind of depends on what you were looking for from your recipes. As I'm ending this video, I want to leave you with a few things that will make following recipes a lot simpler as you're navigating the kitchen. So to begin with, you want to gather all of your ingredients and measure those ingredients before you start. In the culinary industry, this is called mise en place, which means everything in its place. And this is going to mean that as you're going through, you're not going to have to stop and wash your hands to grab other containers. It just makes sure that you're ready to go right at the beginning and that you don't have to stop and find something in the middle of the process. Also, when you're shopping for your ingredients, it's a lot easier to use online ordering for groceries, even if it's just for keeping your list. It keeps you on track with how much you're spending. It also keeps you on track to make sure that you have everything in your cart and to make sure that you're not forgetting an item. There are even some apps that allow you to connect your online shopping cart to certain recipes and just go ahead and add the items in there to your shopping list. Always wash your dishes as you go to make your cleanup simpler. It's always really frustrating when you finish cooking a dish that you end up having this big old pile of dishes that you have to wash. So anytime you can wash the dishes you go while you're waiting for something else to finish up, go ahead and wash it so that you don't have to wash it later. And then make sure your recipes use equipment that you have. A lot of times people will start a recipe and realize, oh, this calls for a stand mixer and I don't have one, or I need a food processor and I don't have one. And it makes things really frustrating to try to figure out how to work around those things in the middle of a process. So just go ahead and read through the recipe before you start to make sure that it has all of the equipment that you need. And as long as you're following all the guidelines in this recipe guide, then you should be able to make any recipe that you come across. If you're looking for ways to follow any of the cooking terms that you see, check out any of the cooking terms videos that I have on the channel. That will help you know how to decipher anything that you might be unfamiliar with. And if you have any suggestions for videos that I can make in the future to make cooking easier for you, please let me know. Thank you so much for watching Mixing with Mercs. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe.